There is a block of pink salt sitting on my flat top right now, and it has been coming up to temperature for 40 minutes. 40 minutes for a rock, and if I rush it, if I put it straight over a burner the way you would a pan, it will crack down the middle and throw pieces of itself across my shop. I have seen it happen. So it sits there and it takes its time. And in about 20 minutes, I'm going to lay a $9 steak on it, and that steak is going to season itself while it cooks. That is number 7. We are going to get there. 6 more before it, cooking straight on top of live coals with no grate between them, sealing beef under fat, slicing it so thin it cannot be tough. Every one of these 7 is a technique you will pay $100 a plate for in a good steakhouse, and every one of them costs you nothing but time. The coals do not know what grade you put on them. The salt block cannot read a label. The marinade does not check the price per pound before it goes to work. Not one of these 7 needs expensive beef, and every one of them works better on cheap beef, which is the part nobody tells you and the part I am going to prove in about 4 minutes. My name is Frank Miller. I cut meat for a living. 31 years behind a block, and 11 of those years I was on the wholesale side, which means I loaded the truck that went out to the restaurants. And so I know what those kitchens pay for a ribeye. I know it to the dime, and I have sat in one of their dining rooms and looked at what that same ribeye cost on the menu 3 hours later, which lets me say the thing they cannot say inside their own building. A steakhouse is not selling you the technique. The technique is free. The steakhouse is selling you the beef because the beef is the only part of it they can put on a check. So the technique gets demonstrated on the most expensive meat in the building always, and you come away thinking the two things go together. They do not go together. They never did. Nobody paid me to be here. There is nothing in the description of this video. So you are going to get all 7 with the cut I would actually buy for each one, what it cost me, and the one mistake that kills it. Every one of them on meat you can afford. Let me give you the principle first because it makes the rest of the video make sense. Every one of these 7 techniques was invented by somebody who could not afford good beef. Everyone, not most, all 7. Cooking directly on coals is what you do when you have no grate, no pan, and no stove, which is most of human history. Sealing meat under fat is how a household kept meat alive through a winter before anybody had refrigeration. Slicing beef paper thin and soaking it in fruit is what you do when the cut is too tough to serve any other way. Wrapping beef in pastry started as a way to make a dull piece of meat into an occasion. Cooking on a slab of salt came off the trade routes where salt was how you move protein across a country without it spoiling. Every one of those is a poor kitchen solving a problem. And every one of them has now had a Michelin star put on it and been served to you at $100 a plate with a truffle on top. That is not a scandal. That is just what happens to good ideas. But it does mean something practical for you, and here it is. These techniques work best on the meat they were invented for. 150-day dry-aged Wagyu does not need help. It is already tender. It is already loaded with fat. It is already the most flavorful thing in the building. Every one of these 7 methods is a way of adding what a cut does not have. Put them on a cut that has everything, and you are gilding something. Put them on a $9 chuck eye, and you are doing the job they were designed for. You are not the one making the compromise here. You are the one using the tool correctly. All right? 7 methods, cheapest and easiest first, and the salt block last because it is the one that will make your neighbors ask questions. Number 1, straight on the coals, no grate, no pan. The steak goes directly on top of glowing hardwood coals, meat touching fire. Everybody watching this just flinched, and I understand it. It looks like a mistake. It is not. Here is the mechanism. A steak sitting on a grate over a fire is being cooked mostly by hot air, and hot air is a poor conductor. That is why it takes a while, and that is why you get grill marks, which are the only 4 places where the meat actually touched something. Lay that steak on the coals themselves, and you have direct contact with a surface running somewhere around 1,000 degrees, and the entire face of the steak browns at once instead of in stripes. And it does not taste like ash. The reason is that the coals are hot enough that the gases coming off them are moving up and out with real force, so almost nothing settles onto the meat. What ash does land, you brush off in about 4 seconds. 2 rules or it does not work. Hardwood lump charcoal only, not briquettes. Briquettes have binders and filler in them, and you do not want that touching your dinner. Lump is the stuff that looks like actual pieces of burnt wood, because that is what it is. And the coals have to be fully lit, glowing, ashed over gray, no black left anywhere. If you can see raw charcoal, you are too early. Wait, cut for it, something thick, 1.5 inches minimum, ideally 2. Chuck eye is my pick. A thin steak on the coals goes from raw to gray with nothing in between. 30 to 60 seconds aside, depending on your fire, then off, brush it, rest it. And now here is the part of number 1 that the good kitchens get right and that almost nobody at home does. They do not throw the trim away. They char the fat and the scrap on the same coals, render it down, and turn it into a sauce to mop over the steak at the end. That is a butcher's move, and I want you to steal it. Ask the counter for beef trim. He is cutting it off everything he touches all day, and most shops will hand you a bag of it for nothing, because otherwise it goes in the barrel. Take it home, char a few pieces over the coals while the fire is going, then put the whole lot in a pan on the lowest heat your stove has, and walk away for an hour. It renders down golden clear. That is tallow, and if you charred some of it first, it carries smoke. Spoon a little of that over a lean steak at the end. You cannot put marbling into a cut that does not have any. You can put the fat back on top of it. Number 2, sealing under tallow. There are kitchens taking beef that has already been dry, aged 150 days, dipping it in melted beef tallow until it is coated like a bar of soap, and putting it back in the cooler for another 2 weeks. Beautiful. Also $1,000. But the idea underneath it is one of the oldest food preservation methods there is. Fat excludes air. Air is what oxidizes fat and turns it rancid, and what lets the outside of a piece of meat go hard and dark. Seal the surface off from air, and the meat keeps changing on the inside while the outside stops deteriorating. Every farmhouse in Europe put cooked meat in a crock and poured fat over the top of it. And that jar sat in a cold room all winter. The man who trained me kept a crock like that on the back shelf his whole career, and he never once called it a technique. It was just where the fat went. Now, I am going to be straight with you about the home version, because this is where these videos usually lie to people. You cannot do 150 days in your kitchen refrigerator. You do not have the airflow, you do not have the humidity control, and you do not have the safety margin. Anybody telling you otherwise is going to get somebody sick. What you can do is this: buy a whole subprimal, a full strip loin, or a boneless ribeye still in the bag, and it will cost you dramatically less per pound than the same meat cut into steaks. Unwrap it, set it on a wire rack over a tray, put it on the bottom shelf of your refrigerator, and leave it alone for 21 to 30 days. That is it. No bag to order, no box to buy. Then cut off the dried outer layer, which will be maybe 1/8 of an inch, and which you will feel bad about throwing away, and cut your steaks from what is underneath. 21 days will get you most of the flavor change that people are chasing at 150. The curve flattens out. The last 100 days in that chef's cooler are him buying something that is genuinely different and genuinely rare. And I am not going to pretend you can replicate it. You cannot. You can get 80% of the way there for the price of the subprimal and a wire rack. Number 3, tempering. This one is free, and it is the one I want to slow down on, because there is a myth attached to it that I need to take apart, even though it costs me. A good steakhouse will sit a bone and ribeye over a low fire for 45 minutes before it ever sees real heat. Bring the inside up to around 30 degrees Celsius, and only then salt it and sear it hard. 2 to 4 minutes on the sear. Beautiful crust, no grill marks, edge to edge, pink inside. That works, and it works because of the temperature gradient. A steak going from a cold refrigerator straight onto high heat has to move a long way. And while the center is crawling up to where you want it, the outer half inch is racing past it into gray. Start the steak warm, and the outside and the inside are much closer together. So the sear is short and the gray band almost disappears. Now the myth, you have been told 100 times to take your steak out and let it come to room temperature on the counter for 30 or 45 minutes before you cook it. That does almost nothing. And I say that as somebody who told customers to do it for years before I actually checked. A thick steak sitting on a counter for 45 minutes moves maybe 3 to 5 degrees at the center, 3 degrees. It has a lot of mass and it is a poor conductor of heat, which is the same reason it takes a while to cook. It would need hours on that counter to actually reach room temperature. And hours on a counter is not something I am going to recommend to anybody. So the counter is not tempering. The kitchen doing this properly is not sitting a steak out on a bench. It has it over a live fire for 45 minutes. That is applied heat, and applied heat is a completely different thing from a warm room. At home, you do that in an oven at 225 degrees or on the cool side of a 2-zone grill until the center reads about 95 to 110. Then you sear it hard and fast. That has a name. Most of you know it. It is a reverse sear, and it is the same idea that Chef was doing over his coals. The salt point he made is real, though, and it is worth the whole segment. Salt does not dissolve well on a cold, wet surface. Get the steak warm and dry first, and the salt goes to work instead of sitting there. Coarse sea salt, and more than you think, right before it hits the heat. Number 4, wrapped in pastry, the Wellington. 7 hours of work, start to plate, and that is not an exaggeration. Sear it, chill it, mustard it, chill it, crepe it, chill it, pastry it, chill it, bake it, rest it. I am going to say something here that a chef cannot say in his own dining room. That the Wellington exists because tenderloin has no flavor. That is the whole thing. Tenderloin is the most tender muscle on the animal by a wide margin, and it is also the blandest because it is nearly pure lean, and flavor lives in fat and in work. That muscle does nothing and it carries nothing. So everything else in a Wellington is compensation. The mustard is compensation. The mushroom layer is compensation. The pastry is compensation. It is a beautiful dish built entirely around covering for the one cut on the steer that needs covering for. And it is the most expensive cut in the case. And so if you want to make one, and it is genuinely a wonderful thing to put in front of people, do not use tenderloin. Use a chuck tender, sometimes labeled mock tender, or a center cut piece of eye of round. Both of those are lean and uniform and hold a cylinder shape, which is all the tenderloin was actually contributing. And both of them have more flavor and cost about a quarter as much. The mistake that ruins it is temperature. If you get any color past medium rare on that sear at the beginning, it is finished because it has to go through a hot oven later. Sear it hard and brief and get it cold again fast. Number 5, sliced thin and soaked. This is the one I would actually recommend to most people watching, and it is the cheapest of the 7. The restaurant version of this uses a 45-day aged prime ribeye, sliced thin on a machine and marinated in Asian pear, onion, garlic, ginger, soy, and sugar for 6 hours. Take the ribeye out of that sentence, and everything else about it is a poor kitchen's technique. Slicing beef thin and soaking it in fruit is what you do to a cut that will not chew any other way, and it is one of the great methods on earth. 2 mechanisms working at once. The slicing is the bigger one. When you cut a piece of beef paper thin across the grain, you have already cut every muscle fiber into pieces before it goes anywhere near heat. You are doing the chewing with a knife. There is no cut on the animal so tough that this does not work on it. Second is the pear. Asian pear carries actual protein dissolving enzymes, and so does pineapple and papaya and kiwi. Those are not acids, they are enzymes, and the difference matters. An acid slows down, an enzyme does not know when to stop. 6 hours is right. overnight in pair, and you will pull out something with the texture of paste. Cut for it, flank, skirt, sirloin, tip, or plain chuck, whatever is cheapest in the case. The trick that makes it possible without a slicer is this. Put the meat in the freezer for 45 minutes to an hour first until it is firm all the way through but not frozen solid. A firm piece of beef will let a sharp knife take slices off it thinner than you could ever manage on a soft one. Every deli in the world does a version of this. Then find the grain and cut across it. 2 minutes in a screaming hot pan in batches, and do not crowd it. Number 6, set on fire. The tomahawk, charcoal and wood, a hard sear, then out to the table on a heated stone, bone marrow butter on top, herbs, and a pour of mezcal set alight. So a column of flame goes up in the dining room. I promised you I would tell you the truth about all 7, so here it is. The fire is theater. Alcohol lit on the surface of a piece of meat burns off in a few seconds at a temperature that is high but extremely brief and entirely on the outside. It is not cooking anything. It is not penetrating anything. What flavor arrives comes from the mezcal itself and from the herbs scorching, and you would get most of that by just pouring it on and skipping the match. Every serious test anybody has run on flambe has come back the same way. I am telling you that even though a flaming tomahawk would make a better thumbnail than an honest one, but there are 2 things in that segment that are not theater at all, and both of them are free or nearly free. The bone marrow butter is real. Ask your butcher for marrow bones. They are cheap, sometimes free, and half the shops in the country are cutting them for dog owners anyway. Roast them at 450 until the marrow is soft, spoon it out, mash it into softened butter with salt and some parsley, roll it in wax paper and keep it in the freezer. A coin of that on a hot steak is as good as anything in this entire video, and it costs about $1. And the hot stone is real, not for cooking, for holding. A steak on a cold plate is losing heat from the moment it lands, and the last bites of a big steak are always cooler than the first. A preheated stone or a cast iron pan straight out of the oven keeps the plate at temperature the whole way through the meal. That is not a trick, that is just physics, and it is the difference between a good steak and a good steak that stays good for 20 minutes. Keep the marrow butter in the hot stone, skip the match. Number 7, on a block of salt, which brings us back to what is sitting on my flat top. And this is a solid block of pink rock salt, usually 2 inches thick, and it costs somewhere between $25 and $40, and it will last you years if you do not break it. Here is why it works, and it is 2 things at once. The salt is dense and it holds a tremendous amount of heat, more than a steel pan of the same size, and it gives that heat up slowly and evenly. There is no hot spot on a salt block. The whole surface is the same temperature, which is why the sear comes out uniform edge to edge instead of blotchy. And it seasons by contact. As soon as moisture from the surface of the meat touches that block, a small amount of salt goes into solution and straight into the meat. It is not dumping salt on there. It gives up a small, even amount across the entire face of the steak, and the result is a level of seasoning that is more uniform than anything you can do by hand. Every bite is the same. No hot spots of salt, no bland corners. 3 rules, and the first one is not optional. Heat it slowly, stages. Low for 15 minutes, medium for 15, then up to cooking heat, and give it 45 minutes total. That block has moisture trapped inside it, and if you turn that moisture to steam faster than it can escape, the block breaks, and it does not break gently. This is the only part of this video where you can actually hurt yourself. Thin cuts only. The block gives up heat slowly, so it will not drive through a 2-inch steak. Thin sliced beef, 1 inch or less, which conveniently is exactly what we made in number 5. And do not wash it. No soap, no soaking. It is salt. Water dissolves it. Let it cool completely. Scrape it with a stiff brush or a plastic scraper. Wipe it with a barely damp cloth. Done. It is self-sanitizing anyway, which is the reason salt was preserving food for 4,000 years before anybody knew what a bacterium was. Now, There is an eighth thing. It is not in any of those seven. Nobody teaches it, and it will do more for your steak than all seven of these put together. Nobody shows you how to cut it. You can watch 100 hours of men cooking steak, and every one of them will finish by putting a knife straight down through it because a clean cross section looks good. Not one of them will explain the grain. So look at the surface of that steak and find the direction the fibers run in. They will look like grain in a board. You want your knife crossing those lines, not running with them. Cut across, and every one of those long fibers gets cut into short pieces before it reaches your mouth. Again, you are doing the chewing with the knife instead of with your teeth. And on most of the cuts I have named in this video, the grain changes direction part way across. A sirloin does it. A flank does it. A skirt runs one way the whole length, and people get it wrong anyway because the fibers are so obvious that nobody looks twice. You may have to turn the meat halfway through and come at the rest of it from a new angle. I have watched a man do everything right for 7 hours and then saw straight down the length of the grain and wonder why it was chewy. That is the trade. That is the part that does not make it into a chef video, because a butcher is finished by the time a chef starts. Let me leave you with the part that has been sitting on me. All seven of these get demonstrated on beef that costs more per pound than my first car payment, and all seven of them started in a kitchen with no money. Coals because there was no stove, fat because there was no ice box, thin slices and fruit because the cut was too tough to serve whole, pastry to make a dull piece of meat into an occasion, salt because that was how you got protein across the country without losing it. Poor kitchens invented every one of these, and they invented them for cheap meat, and then somewhere along the line the technique got separated from the reason and sold back to us with a truffle on it. And I want to be careful here because I am not sneering at anybody. Those are extraordinary cooks, and the beef they work with is genuinely rare. If you can eat like that, do it. But if you cannot, and most of us cannot, understand what you are actually missing, because it is not the technique. The technique is sitting right there, and it costs nothing. It is a fire, a piece of fat, a sharp knife, and some time. The national cattle herd is the smallest it has been since the early 1950s. Beef costs what it costs, and it is not going back down soon. And what I see happening is families quietly stepping down. Sunday steak becomes birthday steak, and birthday steak becomes nothing, and they tell themselves they were cutting back anyway. And you have not been priced out of steak. You have been priced out of the expensive end of the animal. The rest of that steer is still in the case, and these 7 methods were built for exactly that meat by people in exactly your position. So pick one this week, just one. If you have a grill, do number 1. Hardwood lump, fully ashed over, thick chuck eye, 60 seconds aside, and ask the counter for a bag of trim on your way out. If you have nothing but an oven and a pan, do number 3. Low oven until the center reads 110, then the hottest pan you own for 90 seconds aside. If you want the cheapest and the most forgiving, do number 5. Any tough cut, 45 minutes in the freezer, sliced thin across the grain, 6 hours in pear and soy, 2 minutes in a hot pan. And whatever you do, cut it across the grain, then come down to the comments and tell me which one you tried and what cut you used, and tell me what you paid for it and what part of the country you are in, because beef is not the same price in Ohio as it is in Texas, and I read every one of these. Next time I am going to show you the cut I buy more than any other. It is in every case in America. It costs about $8 a pound. Almost nobody picks it up. And it is the same muscle as a ribeye, the exact same muscle. There is a spot on that animal where I can put my knife down, and the meat on one side is worth $24 a pound, and the meat on the other side is worth $8. And I am going to show you where that line is and why it is in the wrong place. Until then, buy the working muscle, cook it slow, cut it thin,